The interest of Livy for Machiavelli resides, I think, not just in his being a convenient repository of a plethora of historical events from Republican Rome, the Republic Machiavelli most admires, but because Livy has a theory of exemplary history that allows for the mediation between historical events and abstract principles of government. Using the exemplum as evidence looks like a conservative gesture in that it encourages viewing the past as a model to be imitated or avoided, but this gesture could and can mask radical change. While the turn to antiquity was a primary cultural trope the Renaissance inherited from antiquity, America today is often said, whether rightly or wrongly, to have a relentless orientation toward the future. From this perspective, John McCormick, who also turns to the past, is untimely. Like Machiavelli, he draws from a wide knowledge of Renaissance as well as ancient history. He focuses on one text in particular, and he also brings together an apparently conservative gesture, grounding his understanding of politics in past thought and action, with an appeal for radical political change. The question I would put to him is, why do his proposals for innovation in America need Machiavelli and Rome? Although there's much to admire in antiquity and also in the Italian Renaissance, there are other aspects that have changed dramatically since then. Among them, a greater intolerance for assassination, tumult, and other forms of political violence. Whatever answer John might make will have to speak to the relation of past to present, of history to theory, of ideas to utility, of thought to action. We'll have to outline the function of the concrete exemplum and abstract political theory in politics. We will have to address how to square the roles of scholar and activist. Generally, as we progress from reading Livy to Machiavelli to John, the theoretical implications of history are articulated more and more explicitly. Livy's history lays the interpretive burden on the reader, who is enjoined to read as an active citizen. The monumental deeds of the ancestors are told to provide models, these are the exempla, for what to imitate or avoid. Recent work on Roman exemplarity emphasizes the dynamic exercise of judgment demanded of the reader. Since Livy stories do not come with morals or precepts attached to them, and often combine virtuous with less than virtuous elements, as well as conspicuous vice. The citizen reader does not learn principles of virtue, but rather must derive such principles inductively from the stories. In the discourses, each chapter comes with a caption that orients the reader towards some normative principle to guide action, or at least toward descriptive principles that reveal how things work. Machiavelli's reader, like Livy's, is presumed to have the social and political capacity to apply whatever lessons are gleaned from reading to active governance. The difference is that the anonymous participatory citizen has been replaced with historical personages, Zanobi, Buondelmonti, and Cosimo Celai, young aristocrats to whom, in John's conception, Machiavelli is trying to sell a much more democratically informed republicanism than has previously been thought. When we get to John, however, the organizational principles are that much more theoretical than Machiavelli's. The events in Livy progress as chronologically as possible, given the narrative constraints on analytic history. Machiavelli takes the events out of chronological order according to the needs of the arguments of each of his three books. But just as Machiavelli disrupts the order of events in Livy, John disrupts and reassembles Machiavelli's argumentative order. The result is the exposition of a clear and consistent argument for democracy that previously lay latent under the surface of the discourses as a text. I want to emphasize this latency since my experience of reading John and then rereading the discourses against his account pulls in different directions. John isolates and highlights as democratic a number of elements, but he isolates as democratic a number of elements, notably the importance of the tribunate as an office to defend the poor against the rich, the positive value Machiavelli attaches to contestation between plebs and senate, what today is habitually vilified, particularly on the right, as class warfare. And the third element I'm focusing on is the good judgment exercised by the plebs when empowered to make real decisions. These elements are all in the text, largely clustered in Book 1. The overall impression of the discourses, however, is not one of a sustained argument for democratically oriented republican government. There are simply too many other concerns at play, some of which seem definitely alarming today, such as the description at the beginning of Book 3 in 3.1 of how notable executions can bring a republic in decline back to its beginnings. If we really were to read for the example, on the basis of Machiavelli's positive assessment of the death of the decemviri for their insolence, or to go further back on the basis of Roman respect for the salutary effect of decimation to reestablish order, we might today decide to put to death, say, a random selection of 1 out of 10 top executives responsible for the financial crisis on the grounds of insolence. The result in this political climate, however, would be an outpouring of sympathy for the poor beleaguered bankers, and the exercise would backfire. My reductio ad absurdum has a serious point. Exemplary reading has its limitations. I doubt that even putting a good quantity of CEOs behind bars would result in the refoundation our republic in decline sorely needs. We simply cannot imitate either the best or the worst of the past. Furthermore, the pull of the present argument or context will necessarily skew the representation of the example. As John shows, Machiavelli misrepresents Roman voting assemblies so that they appear in his account more democratic than they actually were. John is too careful to get such details wrong, but his reconfiguration of Machiavelli has to leave a lot out. Exemplary reading at its best entails the exercise of judgment, which further demands an awareness of changed circumstances. Livy offers only 2 options, to imitate or to avoid the action represented. Sometimes we also need to recognize that a past action is irrelevant, imitation an avoidant point. Machiavelli's formulation to see what has to be from the counterpart offered by the past is similarly limiting. Sometimes new things happen. I would argue further that exemplary reading is necessarily tendentious, and that far from being a weakness, this is its strength. If aspects of John's reading of Machiavelli put more emphasis on democratic elements than is at first apparent, he is following in a great tradition. Quintilian defines the exemplum as the telling of a glorious deed that is useful for the persuasion of what you intend. To be persuasive, you should not distort the historical record, but the primary purpose of bringing the past out of the dustbin of memory is for the argument at hand, and this will entail refraction, if not outright distortion. John has at least 2 purposes, one scholarly and one activist. I find his proposal for an American tribunate a refreshing solution to the systematic tilt toward the grandeur of our own capitalist republic. This offers a clear instance of the utility of history. The past offers a treasury of ideas that may have fallen into disuse for reasons good or bad. Machiavelli, in the preface to the first book, presents the activity of finding new modes and orders as dangerous, and himself as taking a path as yet untrodden by anyone. The classical trope of the untrodden path leads him then, in an irony endemic to the trope, to turn to the ancients as offering models for imitation. The citation of ancient examples to justify what looks like innovation is itself ancient. Suetonius tells of Augustus reading selections of old speeches to the Senate to show them that his proposals had precedent in the customs of the ancestors. In showing that the tribunate, a structurally important feature of Roman republicanism still valorized by Machiavelli, showing that it has fallen out of the past several centuries of republican discourse, John corrects the historical record. But his scholarly purpose works for his activist one, to legitimate a proposal for radical innovation as a corrective to our current political woes. As a classicist, I watch how people use the past as legitimation for the present with interest. Parallels between ancient Rome and contemporary America, and these are all over the media, generally strike me as a little silly. They do, however, obey basic principles of exemplarity as outlined by Quintilian, the citation of past events that are useful for persuading what you intend. Rome can offer a model for republicanism, but it can also for empire. It offers a model for the tribunate, but also for the principate. It offers a model for the development of a regular legal system, but one where legal fictions routinely justify exceptions. A weakness of exemplary thinking is that almost anything and its opposite can be found in the past, so its citation offers an unstable ground for argument. Furthermore, it argues from authority rather than from intrinsic worth. And I wouldn't say this is a weakness we have, but it's a weakness in the method. Another reason, and some of my colleagues, classicist colleagues, are vociferously opposed to any parallel between antiquity and modernity. Another reason to be suspicious of exemplary argumentation is to guard against oversimplification. These my colleagues say would advocate rather a disinterested pursuit of truth. I am skeptical about claims to disinterested pursuits of truth. One of the strengths of John's book is his honest avowal of engaging in an interested reading of Machiavelli to serve the needs of our time. He has adopted Machiavelli's own interested reading of antiquity as a model to be imitated. Although one can and should, and people will, today even, argue about individual points of interpretation, John is true to Machiavelli's spirit by his emphasis on the parts of the political system he wants to promote, even if this refracts the system as a whole. Let me make my own overly simple comparison of the past to the present. Livy began writing when the Roman Republic had given way to the triumvirate, an emergency state of affairs followed by the concentration of power in Augustus. Livy could still imagine a politically engaged reader in a Republican world. But the new reality was one of increasing depoliticization among the traditional elite contestants for power. His own energy for scholarship might well have been directed towards politics a century or even half-century earlier. Machiavelli's writings come at a similar point of transition from a republican to an oligarchic form of government in Florence. The energy directed earlier in his career toward active political engagement is redirected toward scholarship after he falls from power. I find John's proposal for a more democratic and egalitarian system a healthy intervention in the struggle for different visions of republicanism in current scholarship. But the examples of Livy and Machiavelli remind me that the discussion itself comes at a time of threat to the Republican order through the concentration of power in the few.